It's Fernando Ruiz Art. Did I ever mention that I love the character Moon Knight? Now, whenever I talk about Moon Knight, and I know a lot of people have their opinions about Moon Knight. You hear a lot that he's Marvel's Batman, which isn't entirely untrue. But it's not necessarily a bad thing either. It seems usually, whenever I talk about Moon Knight, and it seems like I'm either defending what Moon Knight used to be, or I'm criticizing what he's become. But I always say the same thing, that Moon Knight, despite being a character who is now, believe it or not, he's over 45 years old. Moon Knight first appeared in the early 70s, 45 years old. Which, to put that into context, when I was a kid reading comics in the late 70s, early 80s, Superman, the be-all and end-all of superheroes, Superman was only 40 years old. So now, Moon Knight today is older than Superman was back then. So I always say a character with over 45 years of history under his cowl. For a guy with over 45 years of history, he really only has about 25 good appearances. I hate to say it, but that is the truth. And maybe I'm being a little facetious. Maybe it's a little bit more, but probably not by much. And those appearances, to get those appearances, you have to go back to his original series, his first series, his 1980 series, which lasted about 38 issues, but really it's the first 25 or so issues of it that are good. That's what you have to be reading. And it's a shame, because I think he has a lot of potential, but people really like to complicate things when it comes to Moon Knight. And I'll never forget. It's a very vivid memory in my comic book reading history. I'll never forget discovering Moon Knight. Now, if you grew up in the northern New Jersey area, like I did, the holy mecca of comic books for you was the superhero shop in Livingston, New Jersey, in the Livingston Mall of Livingston, New Jersey. Many of you who read comics in the Marvel comics in the late 70s, early 80s, like I did, you probably remember the superhero shop's ads in the backs of comics, the mail order ads, advertising Star Wars toys and Mego dolls. That was the superhero shop, and that was really, back then in those days, we just didn't have. This was before the explosion of comic shops in the 80s and 90s. Back then, the superhero shop was it. That was my first introduction to a store that could be devoted entirely to comics and comic book toys. Not that there was a lot of those back then, but that was a trip to Disneyland. So I remember it was 1980. So I was probably 11 years old at the time, and I remember vividly only having 50 cents to spend. And comic books at that time, they were cover priced at 50 cents. So I could get one book. So this is a big decision for me. And I had two books in my hands. I had the New Teen Titans. That's right, the New Teen Titans #1, and I had Moon Knight #1. Now, here's the now, and I was trying to decide between the two. Now, both were #1s, which back then, it meant something. A #1 meant something. Nowadays, the first issue of a comic, it's utterly meaningless. It means this is a book that'll be canceled in a handful of issues. But back then, you never knew. I mean, you had the thought, the hope that what you were picking up was one day going to be the next Action Comics #1. Yeah, I mean that was always there. But there was also the hope, the dream, the belief that you were possibly getting in on the ground floor of something good, of something special. You were there to see the next Fantastic Four #1 or Giant Size X-Men #1. You thought it was going to be something good, or at least it could be. So, a first issue always deserved a look at least. Now, I was always more of a DC guy. Growing up, especially in those early days of comic book reading, I was always more of a DC guy. I was just more familiar with their characters. Their characters were a little bit more all over the place during the 70s, on TV, on merchandise. They just seemed a little more accessible than the Marvel characters, who, believe it or not, if we're talking the late 70s, a lot of Marvel's characters might be about 15 years old. So I was more familiar with the DC universe, more comfortable with the DC universe. So the Titans definitely had an advantage here. And I was somewhat familiar with the Titans. I didn't know the New Teen Titans. They were new. They had a bunch of new characters, but I knew Robin and Kid Flash and Wonder Girl, so I was somewhat familiar with them. But then there was this Moon Knight book that I had in my hands. It was a #1. I didn't know who this Moon Knight was, and I didn't know at that point that he had appeared before. So, I had no knowledge of the character whatsoever. So, but I looked at the cover, and you had this guy. Now the Moon Knight cover, and I urge you guys to Google it if you haven't seen it. But it's this striking blue background cover. Moon Knight is looming over these three guys. One guy is like this New York cabbie. The other guy is this slick James Bond type with a beautiful blonde on his arm. And then in the middle is this bare-chested soldier with a machine gun and a hand grenade in his hand. And Moon Knight, with his outfit, with his shiny silver costume, is looming over all of them. And man, that just won me over. That just really, I knew the Teen Titans, but I really was compelled to roll the dice on Moon Knight, and I did. And I fell in love with the character right away. You had that great Bill Sienkiewicz work, which was it was realistic, but it was very stylized and gritty at the same time. Moon Knight's New York was dirtier and seedier. The backgrounds were loaded with like bums and prostitutes and pimps. So it was different than the bright, shiny New York that the Fantastic Four and that Spider-Man hung out in. It was really compelling. And I was 12 years old. It was really racy, new stuff for me. So I was hooked, and from then on, I started buying the issues. Now, back then, we're talking long before there were message boards and Twitter and Facebook, social media. Back then, the social media were the letters pages in comic books. The comic books would publish letters. Do they do this anymore? I can't imagine they even need to with all the social media out there. But back then, comics would run letters pages. And during the early days of a new book, before they had letters to publish on a letters page, the editors had those couple of pages to kill. So a lot of times what you got, the editor or somebody would write some bit of history on the character whose book it was that you were reading. And me, I was a budding armchair historian. I love that stuff. I always loved learning about where the concepts and characters that I love, where they came from. I always dug that. And probably a lot of that love came from articles like that. So early on in Moon Knight, they did run one of those articles that covered the history of Moon Knight, and I learned about how he appeared before, how he, how he first appeared in Werewolf by Night. One thing that I was shocked. Now this was 1980, that Moon Knight had a history already of a good number of years. And that was fascinating to me too. And I also learned that Moon Knight had a different costume, slightly different costume in his early appearances. When he first appeared, his costume, he didn't have his famous, this nice, beautifully shaped, crescent shaped cape. Moon Knight had this cape. I believe he called it a glider cape because he could use it to glide for short distances. And it fastened to his wrist with a couple of buttons. A little on the clunky side. I think he definitely upgraded. I think this cape really does more for him than that original glider parachute thing he had tied to his wrist. So I think that was a wise move. But that early history that you found out about was pretty good. And actually, if Moon Knight does have other good appearances, it was in some of those appearances as he bounced around the Marvel universe before he got his first title, especially his series, his first solo series, which was in a series of backups in it was the Rampaging Hulk magazine, the large magazine size book. And I believe it was in that backup that Bill Sienkiewicz first started drawing the character. I may be wrong about that, so if I am, please correct me. But that was when Sienkiewicz was really in his Neil Adams phase. So his artwork wasn't as wacky as it would get. Certainly not as wild or as stylized as his New Mutants. But it was good. It was really good. I think he really fit Moon Knight very well. Like I said, you hear Moon Knight often being compared to Batman, and so it was kind of suitable that a Neil Adams, who's always so strongly associated with Batman, it suits Moon Knight that a Neil Adams, don't want to say clone, but somebody in his style would draw Moon Knight. But both Batman and Moon Knight have their roots in the shadow style of pulp hero. Both Moon Knight, all three, Moon Knight, the Shadow, and Batman, they're rich guys who go out at night and fight kind of street level crime, even though, Batman can sometimes get a little bit more fantastic. But they fight this sort of weird street level crime. And even Moon Knight, the guy started out fighting werewolves, for God's sake. Which also leads me to another criticism that Moon Knight often gets. I sometimes hear people say, "Oh, how smart is he if he's fighting at night and he's wearing all white?" Well, that right away tells me whoever's saying that just doesn't know the character. Moon Knight is not wearing all white. He is wearing silver. It's rendered white because comic book printing and coloring is what it is. But he is in fact wearing silver. And the reason he's wearing silver is when Moon Knight first appeared, he was a villain of sorts, an anti-hero of sorts, fighting a werewolf. He first appeared in Werewolf by Night, fighting Jack Russell, the werewolf. So to fight a werewolf, you deck yourself out in silver from head to toe, and that should protect you. So that's why Moon Knight is wearing what he's wearing. He is a werewolf fighter. Now that origin from Werewolf by Night, where he was sort of created to fight the werewolf, that would be revised. That would be revised right in the first issue of that first solo series. And I love Moon Knight's origin. I mean, it's a true redemption story, and I recommend anyone check out that first issue of Moon Knight. And I also recommend, if you could track it down, get Moon Knight number 25, which is Moon Knight's first fight with one of his recurring foes, Black Spectre. And that was one of my most favorite superhero fights when I was a kid, was Moon Knight 25. I mean, it was brutal. When you're used to reading about superheroes kind of just throwing crates at each other, Moon Knight going at it with the Black Spectre was really an eye opener. So, sadly, after that first series, and really, I say the series started to kind of lose its way. That first series started to lose its way around the late 20s, certainly by the early 30s. It was it was feeling kind of like filler. It wasn't as gritty and as compelling as the early issues. But that would be it for Moon Knight. He would come back not long after in that series, Mark Spector, the Moon Knight, the Fists of Khonshu, and they changed the character. They gave him powers. They took away one of the things that really made him unique, which was, remember when I mentioned how on the cover of number 1, there's this cabbie, there's James Bond millionaire type with the hot blonde, and there's that soldier. They were all Moon Knight, and that was one of the things that captured my imagination when I was a kid, is that unlike most superheroes, Moon Knight had multiple secret identities. Now, a lot of people would really just run with this in the wrong direction and make Moon Knight seem crazy. That's not what Moon Knight is about. He 2, 3, 4. Oh, gave him an extra finger. That's not, he's not crazy. And if he is, because sometimes, they'd be subtle about it. They'd be subtle about, because Moon Knight, he would always refer to his other identities, including his Moon Knight persona, as totally different people. You know, if he was Stephen Grant, the millionaire, he referred to Jake Lockley, the cab driver, as a totally separate person. He would refer to Moon Knight himself as a separate person. But we didn't get stories that dealt with Moon Knight having schizophrenia or multiple personalities. You know, that would come later, and it would, you know, be handled kind of sloppily by writers who really just couldn't deal with the subtleties of that situation. Which is why you get a lot of people now whose take on Moon Knight, their interpretation of Moon Knight, is that he is nuts, is that he is crazy. All right, so this is also my favorite sort of vision of Moon Knight. I know a lot of people draw him now with, you know, seams and stitches all over the place. They really like to clutter up the cowl area. I don't know if it's David Finch who did this to him, but I know some people like to put this gaudy seam. I like that nice clean cowl like Sienkiewicz used to do. And some people like to carry the seam right through the crescent moon, which to me just makes the crescent moon look like a cent sign. I hate that too. You keep it simple. Avoid seams. I'm really becoming very anti-seams lately. But okay, so there's my Moon Knight. What do you think about my Moon Knight? Any good at all? Should I burn him? Should I trash him? Please let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed these mad ramblings of my comic book collecting background of my misspent youth. I hope it was fun for you, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, please click like. And as always, come on back and catch me next time. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the drawing. Hope you enjoyed me doing it. So I hope you guys will all keep drawing, and see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.